what is the call to healing?
The call to healing for me means it's God's call to people who are still living in a state of hurt.
Okay.
They are still dealing with trauma from their past. They have not healed from those pains, and it's affecting their everyday life. It's affecting their relationships. God is calling us to a place of healing because when you are not healed, it stops the momentum to the thing that God designed you to do. We all have a destiny. We all have things that God has destined us to do to affect not only ourselves, but the rest of the world. That cannot happen if healing doesn't take place. The other thing for me is that a call to healing is God telling you healing is present. All you have to do is get to a place of acceptance. And so what I desire for people to know is that God is calling out. He's shouting out. He's trying to draw you in so that you can reach your divine destiny and purpose in Him.
Where did all this begin? Where did it start? Because I know this is a heavy
Yes.
calling.
Mm-hmm.
So we I've talked to you many a times.
Yes.
I spoke with you over the phone, in person. Where did it all stem from? Where did it all come from?
Well, for me, it started with abuse. It started with sexual abuse as a young child. I was abused as a young person, and it really affected my life. It affected my life in a great way. It affected my development. It affected my self-esteem. It affected every relationship that I had in every area and aspect of my life, all the way to adulthood. When I accepted Christ, I began a journey because I knew that God had something He wanted me to do. And it's always a feeling there. I mean, every believer that you talk to will say there was something going on. And so what God had me do was He had me to kind of deal with where I was and be real about it.
Right.
For me, that meant letting go of those pains, letting go of that hurt, and having God heal me in those places. For me, as a young person, what I didn't realize as I was going through that journey was that there was a history of this abuse in my family.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that was something that was very hard for me to deal with. It was very hard to understand that it happened to my mother. It had happened to other cousins. It had happened to different people, but there was a silence there. And let me take you back just a little bit. So, when my parents, when I finally broke my silence,
Okay.
and my parents found out, that I had been molested by my uncle, it was a strange time because, and this is why I say this, back then,
Okay.
you don't say anything.
Wow.
You just deal with it the best way you can.
You sweep it underneath the
You
rug.
sweep it underneath the rug. So as you survive, not heal, as you survive, you just kind of go on and go through the motions. When you raise your children, that mentality of raising your children comes into effect. So when something happens to them, your thought process is the same as it was for you back then.
Oh, wow.
You're just going to have to find a way to deal with it. Now, there is an expectancy on my part. I'm wondering, is my dad going to beat my uncle up, or is he, is someone going to say something to him? None of that happened. But my mother did say to me, the same thing happened to me. Now, with that being said, it answered a lot of questions for me about my mother, who was an alcoholic.
Okay.
That's how she dealt with her abuse, that she tried to drown it in the alcohol, but it didn't work. She survived it, but she never healed.
How did you deal with it?
For me, giving my life to Christ was the very first step.
Okay.
That was the very first step. Giving my life to Christ, but here's the other thing, not blaming God. That's a point that any survivor of sexual abuse has to get to, because we want someone to blame, because we don't want to feel like it's our fault. So not only being saved, but learning how to trust God. In order for me to trust God, I got to take the blame off of Him, because God is omnipotent.
Okay.
He's omnipresent. You were there. Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you prevent this from happening? And what you have to realize is that choice is man's decision. That's not God's choice.
Okay.
That's a decision made by man.
Moving forward in your life, Now you get married.
Yes.
Reggie has popped the question and said, "Will you marry me?" How long have you been married?
I've been married for 21 years.
So let me ask you this. Now, when a man comes in your life and Reggie is like ready to sweep you off the carpet,
Yes.
what goes through your mind as to, will he accept me? Well, am I okay? Are you healed at that point?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not healed. Because as a victim of sexual abuse, you feel damaged.
Okay.
Your innocence is taken. There are things that are happening to you both emotionally and physically that you can't explain. You don't know what's happening. So there was a part of me that knew I loved him, but there was a part of me that didn't want him to see those scars, didn't want to see those broken places. I didn't want him to see the red clearance sticker, that I felt like I was. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I tell the story to people, there's a popular store, but every store has a clearance aisle.
Right.
And when you go over to that clearance aisle, it doesn't matter what you're looking at. There is something wrong with one of those items.
Okay.
There's a leaf missing off the plant. There's a crack somewhere here. And so as survivors, internally, that's how we feel. But you learn different ways to adapt, and you learn different ways to cover and mask. But eventually, it does manifest itself. It manifests itself in anger. It manifests itself in defensiveness. It manifests itself in areas of intimacy. So I was not healed in the beginning.
Okay.
And eventually, I had to tell my husband what had happened to me. There was an incident where, we're just playing around. We're just joking, and, he's hugging me and grabbing on me, and I say, stop. And he's like, oh, no, I don't want to stop. I'm hugging you. And I say, stop. And he doesn't stop. And I absolutely lose it. And all of that rage that I really wanted to be transferred to my uncle was transferred now he's my husband at this point. And I began to go into detail about those areas in my life. And the amazing thing about God, when you really begin to trust him, he will bring someone into your life that will just completely blow your mind, because he stayed right there. He never left. And it didn't matter to him that I had that kind of experience in my past. I think from his perspective, what he wanted to do now was make sure he protected me from that point forward.
Because, as I think about it, the last person you talked to was years ago, was with your mom. Mm-hmm. And you said that she just learned how to deal with it, cope with it. Mm-hmm. Now you moved on in your life, and you're now married, and you're explaining in detail to your husband.
Yeah.
Newlywed, and now he's not just saying sweep it underneath the carpet or let it go. He's actually sitting there saying, well, let's talk about it. Let's deal with it. Mm-hmm. Because now explain to me, in you all's conversation, as you all discussing it, did you feel sort of like a breaking or something what was happening? What was different now in this conversation than the one that you had years ago with your mom? What was so different?
The difference was I was learning how to trust.
Okay.
I was learning how to trust another man.
Okay.
Which is something you have a difficult time doing.
Wow.
You don't trust the intentions of men. Mm-hmm. I had the same type of issues growing up, in high school and in college. My relationships didn't last. I never trust any good aspect of the relationship, but now I'm married. Okay. And so I started to learn how to trust my husband and trust his intentions. Wow. That's huge. Yeah. Trusting someone's intentions, because we don't trust your intentions. We're questioning those all the time, because we're never going to set ourselves up to get hurt again. So, as I began to talk to him about it, the other thing about it is this: it explains so much about who I was. It explains so much about why I reacted certain ways. And here's the other piece of it that's very important. It helped him know how to approach certain subjects. Even in intimacy, learn how to have a different approach there, so that we could continue to connect as husband and wife. Wow. And it was huge.
And out of how many years later?
Oh, 22 years later. 22 years later. And we are still together, and he is still the absolute love of my life. and he continues to learn more about me. But the beautiful thing, I think, is that he was part of my process and my journey, and he was there with me every step of the way. And that is something you don't foresee.
Okay.
That's not something you foresee. You don't think that you are worthy of that level or that type of love. And that's something that's hard to receive, and it's hard to give.
Let me stay right there for a second, only because a person, to remove the roadblock out of their lives and to move into or towards their destiny, there was some point that you had to accept the fact, well, let me just tell my husband what has happened or what I dealt with in life. So there was a vulnerable place that you now had to confront, and you had to be strong, and you had to let it out and share it. So to someone else, man or female, how do they move past this roadblock to move towards their destiny and to open up and then move where God has called them to be? How do they move towards this place of healing?
You know, one of the biggest things that you have to do to move towards your destiny is make a choice. You simply have to want the destiny. Now, it doesn't come without you making choices to show that soft underbelly, or learn how to trust, or knowing that forgiveness is not optional. Those are things that you have to do. But here's the other piece of it. Though my husband was part of my healing process, I had to want my destiny just as much. So it wasn't about doing it for him or for the relationship.
I'm glad you went there.
It really was about knowing that despite my experience, I still had a destiny. Despite my experience, God still had a plan for my life. See, you think that that's the end all be all to your life. It's all I'm gonna be. I'm going to be on that clearance aisle. I'm going to be on that shelf. When people see me, they're going to look damaged. I have to cover it. I have to do all these things. When God is really saying, all you have to do is accept the healing that I have for you, that my son died on the cross for, to give you. But you have to have someone to guide. My mother didn't have a guide. My mother, my aunts, cousins, anyone who doesn't have anyone to talk to, doesn't have anyone to believe them, there's no guidance there. So what I determined and determined in my heart was that I was going to be transparent. So that transparency would free someone else to start their journey.
So you're here in your organization. What is the name of your organization?
The organization is called Thrive to Heal.
And so in your organization, Thrive to Heal, are you guiding people as to this type of hurt, out of this hurt, so they can move quicker towards their destiny?
I am, because we also think we're alone. You can hear statistics all day long, but you still feel very alone in that experience. And you can look at different people on television, but I'm an everyday girl. You know, I'm just like you. We have a ministry at a women's prison, and I say to them very often when it's my turn to minister, the only difference between you and me is choice. That's the difference. I could have been exactly where you are. So part of the thing that I do is let them know you're not talking to someone who's a novice at this. You're not talking to someone who just decided one day, I'm going to talk to people who have been abused, and I'm going to say, you need to get your act together, and you need to just rise up and get to your destiny. No, I'm talking to people because I know the places, the deep places, the dark places that they go to, that they stay at, that inhibit them and hold them back. And I want to show them that I am transformation in the flesh if you just release that and let God do what he does.
One of the things that I know through your experiences is not get over it. Or just move on. You know, you through your spirit and through your book and through you're saying, look, let's go, let me help you get through this. There's a process. There's a process. And what resonates through you and through your spirit is joy and happiness. It really resonates, because one of our mottos at Around Him Publishing is all about inspire people. And it comes from hurt people can hurt people. So if someone carrying that type of hurt and has not been healed, will continue to go on in life and hurt others as they come across them.
They will.
So in your organization, give us a step-by-step process of how do you work with individuals to move towards their destiny?
So the first step for me is just your willingness.
Okay.
Your willingness to go through the process, because you'll cry, you'll get angry, you may yell and scream, but that is, again, the place where God can deal with where you are, because you've taken off the mask now. You know, there's no more hiding. You've gotten naked, and I need you to be willing to get naked so that you can be free, so that you can become all that God already destined you to be. But see, when you're going through the process of trying to cover and try to hide, you will even adapt to situations and places. I used to be able to be a chameleon. If I was around a certain group, that's what I adapted to. If I was around another type of group, that's what I adapted to. Anything that I thought would hide what I really was going through. So the first thing is make a choice and be willing to take the journey. The second thing is allowing me to be real with you where you are and you being honest with me. Everybody's experience is different. Someone may have a different experience from mine, and you know, mine lasted a couple of years. Someone could have gone through it for 5 years. At the end of the day, at the end of the journey, my hope and my prayer is that they learn how to trust God and that they learn how to understand that the experience hasn't defined them. The experience tends to make us think that that's who we are. It's not who you are. It's what happened.
Oh, wow.
There's a difference.
Okay.
And that's why I want people to understand, just because you have a corporate job, just because you go to work every day and you think you're the best soccer mom in the world, does not mean you are healed. There are still some places in your life where those hurts and those scars are being manifested. They're being manifested in your job evaluations. They're being manifested in your relationships with your children. They're being manifested in relationships with your husband, with your friends and your family, and nobody can figure you out. No one can put their finger on, why is she so defensive all the time?
Wow.
Or, you know, she just seems angry about everything.
Okay.
You can't talk to her about anything. All I said was, you know, that skirt is, you know, kind of tight. Everything becomes a trigger. And you allow that to then label you. You walk in that label. You walk in that label of being the angry person. I walked in a label of being the mean cousin.
Okay.
I walked in that label
I
for
can't
a long
even see
time.
you being the mean cousin.
You
But
know,
go ahead.
isn't that something? When people see me now, they go, really? Did someone say that about you? But you know what I did? I actually realized that that was a trick.
Okay.
That was a trick to pervert my mind from who God was really calling me to be. It wasn't mean. I was protecting myself. And for me, I never came, you know, for me, the definition of mean is that you purposely want to hurt someone else. Never, ever my intention. But I was going to protect myself at all costs.
There where you say protect yourself, for someone who's dealing with or has dealt with hurt, they go into a defense mechanism.
Absolutely.
And they are trying to protect themselves from this never happening again.
Yes.
But what I'm listening to and hearing and reading from your book is you're showing someone and teaching someone how to trust again.
Yes.
You know, a lot of times, let's just be real about it. Before some people can really go and say, I trust God, they have to trust someone.
Yes.
And
yes.
we have to be an example and to be lead by an example to say, you can trust me, which then says to a person after they trust you, say, you know what? Just like you trusted me, you can trust God.
You do.
And then another thing that I hear, and you can elaborate on for us, not only is trust, but you're giving people their voice.
Absolutely.
That has been
Absolutely.
lost somewhere along the line.
Absolutely. And that's important. It's important. It's important in so many different aspects that you learn how to trust and understand that that's part of the path to the destiny that God has for you.
Wow. At that point, you said none of this was working. And then you just gave it all to God.
I did.
Walk us through that.
You know, it's important for people to understand that I know in my heart that I could not have healed in and of myself. But accepting Christ is one step, big step, important step. But after that, you grow in your relationship with God and you continue to release those places of hurt and those scars to God. My salvation story is for me just a good indication or wonderful indication of God being present even when I thought he wasn't. Because when you're someone who has gone through molestation, the first thing you say is, "Oh, you want me to believe in God?"
Let me ask you a personal question. I know I've asked you before, but I want the viewers to hear from your perspective. Through the process, through the hurt to the healing, you've gone to the family member and they told you to sweep it underneath the rug. You've gone to the therapist and all they did was accept your check and listen. Nothing came out of that. And you went to the church. But then somewhere along the line, you've made the decision and you said, "I'm going to give it all to God."
Right.
Walk us through that process when you made that decision.
Sure. It's important that people understand that though I know in my heart I could not have gotten to this place of healing without God, even in that acceptance of Christ, there was still a process that I had to go through. But it's also important for people to understand that I realized that God was present. Now, let me take a step back and say, for a person who has been molested, I think you have opportunities to know God. You will have family members that go to church, your grandmother takes you to church, but after that experience where your innocence is stolen, the thing that you think about is God of love, he's the protector, because in church back then, they don't talk about the things that happen in the dark. They don't talk about things that happen in the secret room. They put you in a position, they tell you, it'll be okay. You just, have to get over it. But I met a young man who was someone I thought I loved. But again, when your innocence is stolen, your idea of love is very twisted and perverted. You think that to give and receive love, you have to use your body. That's the way that you make people love you. So that's the kind of relationship that we had. But even in my decision to do that, God was present because his mother was an evangelist. I began to travel with her when she would go speak. And that's when I first accepted Christ. He was there even then, and he paved the way for me to start my path to healing. But you talk about the therapist, you talk about the family member. Even when I got saved and started going to church, here's a really important piece. They're not responsible for my healing. I am. You want everyone else to do it. You don't want to have any part in it because why should you? I'm the victim. So, husband, you need to do everything to make sure I'm healed. Pastors, y'all the ones that are close to God, y'all do something to make sure I'm healed. We never take on the responsibility for our own healing. And that's hard for survivors to hear because that's not how we see it. I'm the victim. I need to be compensated by God, by the church, by the husband, whoever wants to be a part of my life, you're helping me to compensate. Survivors have to take responsibility for wanting the healing. It is our choice that starts that process. But when you see yourself as a victim, that's the role that you continue to play throughout your life.
Come on now.
So that your interaction with people has you as the victim and them as the one who needs to save you, rescue you, and be responsible. I need you to heal me. Even in the church. Now, I'm saved, but I still don't see God as the healer. I still have not fully released myself and allowed myself to trust him to continue that healing process. The pastors are here. You do it. My husband's here. No, you do it. So when I finally understood that my choice to heal included the responsibility for my healing and that it didn't belong to anyone else, then things began to move in my life. And every time I took that step towards God, things begin to open up. Now, let me be clear about when I say open up. Things begin to open up so that I would understand who God was, how the experience no longer defined who I am, but it also allowed me to see the areas of scarring that I had been trying to cover up. My mother had an old saying, I grew up in the country. I rode big wheels and all that kind of stuff. I'd get on them and ride and scar my little self all up. And so I would want to put a Band-Aid over it and just cover it all up. And my mother would say, you got to take that off. You got to let some air get to it.
Right.
Why? You need a scab to form so the healing can take place underneath. Survivors don't want to do that. We don't want to take it off so you can see the scar. But God, when you do that, you're also signifying your level of trust to God. When you take that off and you say, God, let your wind of healing and mercy come and heal that place of hurt, that's when you begin to really start to heal. So I don't want people to think that, oh, Vanessa got saved and wow, boom, she's healed. God still had some work to do in me, because it's almost like you tell someone who's been smoking for 20 years, just put the cigarette down. You're talking about a habit that's been 20 years. That's a process. That's why we have so many products out about, how to break certain habits. It's the same thing in the life of a survivor. We need to take steps, but each step that we take is a choice of our own. Doesn't belong to anyone.
Taking ownership in one's, not considering yourself the victim.
Right.
But walking in victory.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Let me jump into one of your areas that you teach and you love to teach about, the ripple effect.
Yes.
Explain to viewers what the ripple effect is.
Well, as I go into explaining what the ripple effect is, here's how it's the most powerful: when the vision is changed. You talked about, going from being a victim to being a victor. That comes as my vision has changed. So now that my vision has changed as to who I am in God, I'm not only healed, but I'm empowered, I'm delivered, and I'm the enemy's worst nightmare. Now what I want to do is I want to create the ripple effect. When you see a pebble drop into the water, I'm dropping in hard, and it creates those ripples on the water. The ripples on the water, to me, represent anyone who may decide to take that journey to heal. When they take that journey to heal, I want them to then become the pebble and create their own wave of ripples. The silence needs to be broken on this subject. It needs to be broken. We have been quiet long enough. There are thousands, probably millions of people who are still suffering because they're holding on to those places of hurt. They're holding on and trying to cover those scars. Covered wounds never heal. At some point in time, my mother said, you have to let that thing, you have to let the air hit it. And when I think of the air, I think of God's wind. And that's the thing that creates the healing. So this is not solely about me and necessarily my journey,